If you don't have a device to test your app on, you must use emulation. Unfortunately, you can only emulate iOS on Mac OS X, but fortunately, you can emulate Android on Windows. So the first requirement for Android emulation is to install Java. So go to Google and type in Java JDK and click on the first link that comes up. Next, click Download Java and then accept the license. From there, you'll be able to download either the 32-bit or 64-bit installer for Java. Once you've downloaded this file, go ahead and execute and install Java. After the installation, we can install the Android Studio by visiting developer.android.com/SDK. Next, run through the Android Studio installer. This installation will take a long time. This is because the Android Studio installation encompasses an IDE, Android SDK Manager, and it will include the latest Android SDK platform as well. Then once it's finished, go ahead and exit out of the Android Studio, because now it's time to make sure that our OS can find all of these programs to compile our Android application. So the first thing we want to do is click on the Start menu, right-click on My Computer, and then click on Properties, and then go to Advanced System Settings. Then click on Environment Variables, and we want to scroll down and take a look at the Path variable. Click on the path variable and then click Edit. Now we need to navigate to the Android SDK directory. So first click the Start menu, then go to My Computer, then go to your main C drive, Android SDK, and here is where the main SDK is found. However, we want to go into the Tools directory, and once you're in that directory, click the folder icon and you will get the path text. Press Ctrl+C to copy that path text, and go back to the System Variables window. Now before pasting this path in, please make sure you add in a semicolon. Each path must be separated by a semicolon. Once you've added the semicolon, press Ctrl+V and paste in the path. Now we also need to add in the Platform Tools directory. So add in another semicolon ready for another path, and then go back to your File Explorer, go back to the SDK directory, and then go into the Platform Tools directory. Again, click the folder icon and copy and paste into the Environment System Variable field. Finally, we need to add in the all-important Java JDK directory. So we go back to the File Explorer, then you want to go back to your C drive again, go into Program Files, Java, and then you want to go into the JDK directory. Once you're in that directory, click the folder icon, copy, and paste. Once we've done that, go ahead and click OK on all of the open windows. Now once we've set this all up and our operating system can find all of those programs, we can now take a look at going back to your computer's C drive and then going into Android SDK, and finally create a shortcut for the Android SDK Manager. This then makes it easy to go ahead and launch the Android SDK Manager wherever your shortcut is placed. So I'll double click this shortcut on my desktop and the Android SDK Manager will open. The Android SDK Manager allows us to install software development kits, or SDKs, for the different Android operating systems. First, make sure you have the Android SDK platform and build tools selected for installation if they are not already installed. Now, the reason why the SDK Manager doesn't download every single package that's available is because a lot of the older Android platforms are obsolete and are no longer being supported by Google. So there's pretty much no need to download those SDKs. On top of that, it takes up a lot of hard drive space, and you only really need to install the packages that you want for your testing. Apart from the build tools and platform tools there to do with the actual build process that creates your application. Now, as long as you have your build tools and platform tools installed, I'd also like to install Android Lollipop, which is Android 5.1.1 and is recommended for Cordova, otherwise you'll get an error during the build process. So I can install all packages to do with this OS. However, I can pick and choose, and I'm just going to eliminate some of those packages that I don't need because it's taking up precious hard drive space. However, I am going to include some system images to do with ARM and the x86 or Intel Atom processors. So what are system images? Well, you have the ARM architecture and you have the Intel Atom architecture and potentially a few others. But what it's really doing is it's mapping hardware. So if you to think about your device, it more than likely has an ARM processor inside, which is a very, very popular processor because it saves on power. But also you could have, let's say, an Intel processor in there or something of another kind. However, ARM and Intel are the most popular, with ARM being the most popular. And what the system image allows you to do is map that hardware architecture in, let's say, your emulator so that you can test that your application works on a device that has an ARM processor. And likewise, the same for an Intel processor and other processors. Now, it's not necessarily required. In most cases, your application will be able to run on both architectures no problem because you're creating a hybrid application, but there can be some plugins that are very specific, which we'll talk about later. However, that's what the system images are. They just allow you to map out hardware configurations and instruction sets that are for certain processors. So after selecting the packages that I want for testing environments and the build process, I can then go ahead and say install these packages. A window will pop up and you need to accept all of the licenses that are there. So you can go ahead and click on it and say accept license for all those different licenses. And then you can go ahead and say install. Once all of our packages have been installed, it's now time to take a look at creating an Android emulator or AVD. So to set up an Android virtual device, or AVD for short, we need to open up the Android AVD Manager. So drop down the Tools menu and click on Manage AVDs. Now you can create a new AVD from scratch, or you can create an AVD from a pre-existing device definition. So I'll click on Device Definitions and then I'll create an AVD from the Nexus 6 definition. Firstly, we have the AVD name. This is very important because it's something that we will have to target later on in the command prompt. I'll give this AVD the name of Nexus_6. Next, we have a list of device definitions that we can choose from which have different screen resolutions. Then we have the target. This is the operating system that is emulated on the AVD. So I'll choose Android Lollipop. Next, we can emulate a CPU/ABI. This is the processor's instruction set that's mapped by the system images that we downloaded. It's recommended for performance reasons that if your computer has an Intel processor that you emulate an Intel Atom processor. However, I'll go with the popular ARM architecture. Next, we have the ability to say whether our emulated device has a hardware keyboard. If so, the virtual keyboard will be disabled. I want the virtual keyboard, so I'll uncheck this checkbox. Then we have a choice of skins to choose from. You can have a skin with dynamic controls, no skin at all, or other various skins that give a device-like appearance. Next, you can emulate or use a webcam connected to your computer for the front and rear cameras on the AVD device. Next, I can allocate how much RAM or random access memory my AVD device can have in megabytes. Then I can define the VM heap size. This allows me to allocate memory to single applications. So any application that's running on the AVD will be allowed up to the amount of megabytes you've set here in memory, and if it goes over that, a quota error will present itself. Also, we can emulate the internal storage and additional storage, such as an SD card. Finally, we have some emulation options. you can either have snapshot or use host GPU to speed up the emulator. Note they cannot be selected both at the same time. Once we've set all the options, click OK and the AVD will be created. Please take a note of the AVD names. We have Nexus_5, which was my original AVD. That's the default one that will open up. However, I've just created the Nexus_6 AVD, so remember that name exactly as you see it here because we're going to use it in the command prompt later. Now we need to install Cordova. Cordova is the application that is going to compile our Android project for our app and produce the final APK file, and then we can run that app file on my AVD devices. To install Cordova, open up the command prompt and type in npm install -g Cordova. After the installation of Cordova, we're now ready to add in an Android project to our app. This project can then be compiled into an APK file and be installed on the Android AVD. So now what we need to do is target our app's root directory, which in my case, I'm going to cd or change directory to my desktop and then the Cartoon Smart directory. Now the command prompt is focused on this directory, type in Cordova platform add Android. If I now go ahead and take a look at my app's root directory and then go into platforms, you'll notice we have an Android directory. Within that directory, we have an Android project ready to be compiled into an APK file. Now, unfortunately, we're still not ready to compile this project. One last step is to go back to our app's root directory and change the config.xml file. We need to change the minimum SDK preference. It needs to be at least 14. So once I make that change, I'm then going to save this config.xml file and then go back to the command prompt and recompile my application. So now we have everything set up and our command prompt is focused on our Cartoon Smart directory. It's now time to type in Cordova run Android. This will then compile our project and run it on the Android emulator, and this is the default Nexus_5 emulator. Now let's target our newly created AVD by typing Cordova run Android --target equals, and in the quotation marks type in the AVD name, which is Nexus_6. This will target our AVD that we set up earlier. And after a few minutes, our targeted AVD will launch and open the PhoneGap app. So there we have it. We've now successfully emulated Android on Windows.